For more on that, we're joined by Eldad Tamir. He's the CEO of Tamir פישמן Investments, joining us from Tel Aviv, the most expensive city in the world. Thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you.
So anyone who lives in...
It looks like it's a good thing, but actually I think first place is a losing place.
Yeah, it's a list nobody wants to be on. Anyone who lives in Tel Aviv and travels often to those rival cities, so to speak, isn't surprised by the data. The cost of living here is very high and it's often discussed. But what is still surprising is that so many products and services are so expensive here. Can you try to explain to our viewers why that is?
Yes. Well, let's start about, for instance, let's talk about energy. Energy in Israel is, third place in the world. Half of what we pay for energy goes to the government for taxes. So that has to, to be connected to the way the government puts its budget on the table. Other things are that, this is the only metropolitan city in Israel. Nobody invested in, roads and trains and so on to create the possibility for youngsters to enjoy the modern life in other cities in Israel. So everybody that, young people go out of the army and start studying and then need to work. And the only place they can actually find work in the modern world and the digitized world is in Tel Aviv. So everybody comes here. There's a huge demand for housing. There's a huge demand for food. And then you can, everyone wants to buy things and there's less and less of, starting from real estate and other services. And that's the result.
But still, I have to insist and try and break that down with you, because if you look, for example, at one of the parameters that this survey looked at, a can of corn, for example, it costs in Israel 3 times more than in the center of London. Why?
Well, that has to do with a lot of unfair, I would say, trading habits in Israel. For every product that we buy, there are about 5 intermediates who buy and sell in the middle, and that's the result. The result is that it's a small city. There's lack of competition in the end stores, in the retail stores. There's a lack of competition in the distribution arena, and that's the result of all of that. So being, London is a big city. Anyone can start a business and try to compete. Here it's becoming harder and harder to compete, and less competitors drive higher prices. So it's kind of fundamental to Israel being a small country, and Tel Aviv being a small city in a small country creates this crazy price arena.
An island within an island. Tamir, what sort of steps do you think the government needs to consider taking in order to reduce the cost of living here, beyond increasing the interest? Is there anything else that you would think of that the government should take into consideration?
I think there are major issues to be solved. Unfortunately, we still don't have a real plan. First of all, let's talk about real estate, renting prices. I mean, that's crazy. If we look at the youngsters, the percentage of their income goes into real estate or living, it's incredible. That really harms their way of life, and that's something the government has to fight. Now, to fight this issue, you need to put it on a first priority, and I don't think that's happening yet, but it has to be a first priority. Interest rates is not the issue. The issue is the exchange rates. Part of what we see here as being very expensive actually shows us that the price purchasing power is wrong, and that has to be by the hands of the central bank. And the third issue I would say is to really drive a lot of competition. Being a small country, you have to have regulation in place to drive competition. And those, I would say, the 3 major issues that the government has to put on the table. Because otherwise, people would leave the country. They can't. It's the GDP per capita. If you compare it to the 5 states on the list here, is like we're half of that. So it's not only the prices are very high, our GDP per capita is low. So we're asking our citizens actually to be poorer and poorer from a year to a year.
Correct, though I would say that the GDP per capita in Israel is not the GDP per capita in Tel Aviv. For sure, it is the wealthiest city in Israel. But of course, you're right. It's not like people make here accordingly to what they are expected to spend. Eldat, Tamir, thank you very much for breaking this down together with us. Hopefully, we can speak again when Tel Aviv is off that list, or at least in a more decent place where it belongs. Thank you very much.
I agree.